That looks like we're about there.
Okay, my microphone setting. Yep. And we're good to go. Hello everyone. As you see, this is a Halloween stream. Very interesting. Right, hopefully wait for a few people to come here. And in the meantime, I should explain what this garb of mine is. Now, anyone in the know, I am All Might, or his Scrawn Might persona from My Hero Academia, because it's one of the few characters that I can do on the sheep, including doing a copious amount of eye makeup. Hello, Shane. Nice for you to join us and hair in my mouth. And then you're going to enjoy an hour of me wrestling with these. Hello, Addy. Yeah, hair in my mouth already. That's a good start. How is everyone today? How was their Halloween? It's been a good day for us. UK's just been put into another lockdown Thursday, so that'll be fun. Hello, Sunny. That should be fine. No more time to write. More time to work on other things. As I said, this hair is going to be fun. So, what I thought, we'll have the usual sort of, Q&A writing things, how everything's going there. And as per the Halloween, I've got a lovely little reading from book 1, which I'll probably do first, actually, and sort of see where we go from there. And I'm going to put my glasses on now, because even though my cosplay character doesn't wear glasses, I need to see, which is always a great start. Cool. Thank you, Bellum. Bespeckled Toshi now, evidently. Right, so, let's get started. I thought what we'll probably do, whether we theme this to anything particularly spooky or not beyond that is up to debate, but what I thought I'd do is... Karowen, just having a problem hearing you. Okay, volume level, clarity, what's the problem? Could you give us a hint? Because it should be going through my microphone. Is that any better? Let's see, properties, is that coming through? Yes, it is. Okay, let me know if there's any more technical problems, and I'll deal with them as best as my tech-riddled brain can deal with. Now, anyone who's a returning person to the stream, something I always neglected to show, and I think, while this isn't essential, if anyone is writing fantasy or anything involving any kind of sword combat, what I've found is a good benefit if anyone actually has one of their own. I don't think I've ever showed this off before. This was a lovely little thing I got from the Antique Centre a couple of years ago, and this is a proper blade as well. Let me tell you, it is not mucking about. We actually got this Bespeckled Toshi is best Toshi. Much better, thank you. Cool. So, as far as I'm aware, this was, well, it says made in India, so this is a pretty hefty cavalry sword that I'm aware of. Now, anyone who's doing sword combat in their books, it's not a requirement, but I reckon 2 benefits will really help you. One is checking out a lot of fencing and sword combat videos, not like looking at stuff like Star Wars duels or anything, actually seeing how they properly do them, because there's some great videos online there. And another one is actually seeing if you can own one, because let me tell you, there's a great deal of extra realism you could do if you actually physically have one, because deceptively hefty, and of course it depends on which version you have. Plus, if anyone tries to break into your house, you'll give them the fright of their life. So that's not spooky, just pretty damn cool. And I thought, well, if we can decorate the place a bit more Halloween-y, got the skull, always nice. Where's the best place to put it? Yeah, you can barely see it, but, it is what it is. Yeah, it's there because you need it. And for all the My Hero fans, little Aizawa on the shoulder, lovely. And I'd say we've tried to set the scene. I'm not going to muck around with the lighting. I experimented with the idea of making it gloomy, but you can just about see me as it is. Addy, I have a Roman gladius, but it's just a reproduction. I still reckon you could scare anyone who tries to attempt anything dodgy with you with one of them. someone comes at you with a epoxy knife, and then you see what the problem is. Right, let's see where we are. Okay, I reckon we can start things off. Now, as I said, this is the normal format for the writing stream for all the new people. Oh, Sonny, I want to buy a saber for Kasumi Anda uses her first. I mean, the best justification you can do when owning a sword is, oh, it's just for my character, it's just for research. Because everyone will totally believe that. And it's the same with me as well. You know, the person of my disposition walks in, no upper body strength, clearly weedy, clearly looks like an anime fan, coming in going, oh, I'll have your best sword, please. No, cheapest sword. And one that wouldn't break and actually be somewhat authentic. So, anyway, the format for these usually are any questions or any sort of conversation points regarding writing anything. You put it down in the comments and we can have a discussion about that. We've had some great talks in the past regarding villains, regarding plotting, writing process, all that stuff. And failing that, I had some very interesting questions asked to me on Twitter. Now, I should say, it's been about 3 months since the last one, and I have felt a bit bad about getting off this trend because so when was the last one? That was June, July. Yeah, I think I think it was the July, August and September ones, because at one point it was we were just getting the shop ready because we were opening again, which is kind of ironic because we're about to shut again. Only for about a month though. By December everything should be open again. So we're doing that. Technical problems in one, mental health problems with another. So only right that I'd choose Halloween to come back to. Looking forward to the Christmas stream one. That should be fun. Might actually have something to show off on the Christmas stream one as well. But anyway, enough jabbing on. Let's get to what we all came for, which is the spooky reading. Now, I'm not going to do this in any... As tempting as it would be to do a Bela Lugosi? No, Vincent Price. As tempting as it would be to do a Vincent Price narration, I'm not going to. I'm just going to give everyone a lovely image. Now, this is Chapter 6 of Book 1, which has... Yeah, that's a good place to... I've just decided I'm going to stop in the most awful place for anyone that hasn't read this. So this is Chapter 6. They have entered the Styx, which is the limbo point between realms, and they are about to encounter a... Now, if anyone here is a Steven Universe fan, you might recognise these as being a little nod to the Corrupted Gems, because in these books, you'll find that when a human goes to the other side, when they die, they become a ghost, they go to the other side. But it doesn't always work. And when it doesn't work, you'll find that they essentially become corrupted, and there is a brilliant commission piece. No, it wasn't even a commission piece, it was a sketch, by an artist I know on Twitter, who I will link. When this video goes on YouTube, I'll pin the link in the top so everyone can see this artwork. It's brilliant. But it's essentially a... you can't go wrong with Steven Universe reference. That's why I do them. Essentially this... If you take a human soul and then twist and corrupt it, you get something downright horrific. So, let's see where we can begin. Right. Chapter 6. What is the name of this chapter? The chapter is Into the Styx, rather appropriately. And this is a few pages in. So let's see what horrible beasties we can encounter. Once they arrived at the docks, Trem stepped off the raft. Gabby watched as she reached into her scabbard and pulled out her blade. The dead and dying bushes in front of her rustled and shook. Out you come. There's no hiding from this, Trem called out to the creature. Her hand maintained a vice-like grip on the sword's handle. Gabby looked on in horror as the creature revealed itself. It was human-shaped, but it was walking on all fours. The wrists of the creature were mangled and twisted, and it had used the back of its hands to walk. The bones in the fingers had all broken, and were all bent and contorted in a variety of ways. Where there were once fingernails, now there were very sharp-looking claws sticking out of each end. The collarbone had dislodged, giving the creature a tilted and off-centred look. The head was straight, but that was the only thing it retained from its original human form. The eyes were totally white and featureless. No iris could be seen. Where there was once a full head of brown hair, now there were just wisps, and several patches of scalp had come from the skull, leaving some white skull exposed. But the worst part of it was the mouth. The bottom row of teeth had elongated and had turned into, as Gabby thought, jumbo fangs. In fact, they were so big and sharp that they were pushing into the creature's top lip. Because of this, a thin trail of pale blood ran down its mouth, staining its yellow teeth red. As this horrendous monster was scarier as this hideous monster was scaring the ever-loving hell out of Gabby, something was familiar in some way. She noticed the creature was wearing the scrappy remains of a pair of blue jeans and a white and blue rugby top. Then it hit her, and the revelation made her stomach turn. That murderer from the papers, the one who'd been killed in the barn not too far from her, Dean Jackson. That's who this creature was. Looking down, below his chest was a large patch of dry blood, exactly where he'd been shot. The corrupt spirit of Dean Jackson growled. An inhuman clicking offset the guttural sound. It looked like it was a bull, ready to charge. Gabby glanced back at Trem. The Menzadu closed her eyes as she held out the sword straight, so she pulled the blade parallel to the centre of her face. Her other hand moved up the sword. Her hand opened up and wrapped around the blade. The sapphire ring on her thumb began to glow. Her eyes shot open and she pulled her hand up from the blade. It opened up and moved to the back of her side as the sword ignited with blue flames, much like a flint and steel. The blue pattern that ran up the sword was generating a thick, strong blaze with an odd sapphire ember dropping to the floor. Oh my, Gabby muttered, her mouth wide open. This was so cool, especially when Trem slowly rotated the blade in her hand, put one foot behind her and gripped the flaming sword with both hands and adopted a fighting stance. The creature roared, the fusion of pained human scream and a snarling beast. It charged at Trem, running full speed, while Trem stayed in position. The corrupted soul jumped, ready to bring its vicious form down on Trem. While it was hanging for a split second in the air, Trem slashed the air with one swift motion from her sword. A crescent of blue fire emerged and struck the beast, sending it flying back into a wall of one of the buildings. The fire set some of the dead plants ablaze as the creature began to recover, getting back on its feet. Gabby maintained her distance. The fighting was a good few feet away from the raft. The creature shook its head, and its deformed mouth widened, letting out another disturbing roar. Trem and the spirit ran to each other. The Dean Jackson ghost brought its claw-like hand down onto Trem, who slashed it with her sword. It recoiled in pain, the flames leaving a deep wound in its hand. Gabby noticed the gash, red with blood, and starting to turn blue, small crystals forming inside it. The creature used its other hand to strike, which Trem dodged by sidestepping to the right. In the nick of time too, as the strike hit much closer to the ground, creating a crack in the concrete. Trem ran around the back of the spirit and slashed its back, cutting through the shirt and slicing open the skin along the vertical cuts. She thought she was doing well, till she was met with the blank face staring back at her. This was tougher than the last one. She swirled the flaming sword in her hand and took a step back. When the spirit turned around to face her on, she pointed her blade straight and charged. Both Trem and the spirit screamed as she drove the blade into the beast's shoulders. Trem twisted the blade, the flames catching the creature's top, setting it on fire. The spirit began widely flailing, trying to put the fire out. Trem tried to pull her sword out from him, but it felt lodged in tight. While its arms wavered around in desperation, Trem was flung around like a rag doll. She forced her boot into the ghost's chest and tried to use it as leverage as she tried to pull out her sword. The spirit used the one instant that it wasn't in a blind panic to strike Trem with the back of its hands, sending her to the ground with a painful thud. I tell you what, we'll skip a bit because there's a bit of spoiler there. The spirit was now bearing down on Gabby, every step bringing it closer to her. With its one good arm, it raised its clawed hands. Gabby closed her eyes, hoping it would be a quick and easy process. Why don't you fight someone who can fight back, you coward? Trem yelled, struggling to get back on her feet. The spirit's head shot back up and growled. A fresh trickle of blood ran into its mouth. It snarled, its hand dragging across the dirt, and then it charged. With the sword still lodged in its shoulder, all Trem could do was put her arms up before the thing jumped on her, its jaw opening wide, clamping down on Trem's arm. She screamed in agony as the huge teeth went right through her arm. Meaty. And tell you what, I'll call it there, because what I wanted to do there was just highlight a bit of just how nasty I can make it. And I'll tell you what, it was actually a great deal of fun writing that, because I think you can never go wrong with a little bit of disturbing imagery. I mean, I'll read more if we've got more time. I remember where the place is. So, if we don't have anything else coming towards us, then I'll make sure to do that. This week is fun. So, viewers, what did everyone think about that? I'll tell you what, actually, I will put the picture in here, actually, so just so everyone can know. It's a great demonstration of the artist's skill, actually. So while I do that, I thought I'd sort of address... I know I seem to be sort of going all over the place today, but... where are the pictures? There they are. So I thought one of the things that sort of came into my mind recently, especially in regards to that, is because some of the feedback I got from the sort of how the Snarly Beasts go is actually quite, interesting and quite positive. Sort of the question dwelled on me, which is what makes good horror. And it very much depends on, in my opinion, not speaking as an expert, but I reckon it's a lot to do with what... Because I think a lot of people... I know Bellum in here, she's writing a very juicy tale regarding Hellscape, and Sunny here is... both at part of Halloween, I think so. Both Sunny and Bellum are both delving into particular types of horror in their book. I know it's fair to say Sunny has some wonderfully written body transformations, and some sort of low-lying eldritch abominations going on the back of the story, while Bellum has a lovely hellscape. But I thought, there's so many different genres out there, and there can be some wonderful opportunities for a bit of horror in there. We've seen body horror in there. And I think, and one nice thing to do when we want to be a bit twisted is really double down on sort of being unnerving, and I find a great way to do that is to take things that we all know and twist them in such a deep, depressing way. Like, especially when it comes to Sunny, book 2 will be even worse, I bet. I can't remember who said it, but I think someone said there's nothing worse than a transformation that you can't control. And when it came to writing my work, I definitely thought, these things that used to be human and now have been turned into these brainless monsters. I think we can all agree that is a fate that we wouldn't put on any of our worst enemies. So to stick it in these settings just makes it all the more twisted, especially with the more twisted ways that they actually come about. And I always think the more descriptive you get, the better. It's because I'm being described as a descriptive writer, because I think if you don't want to leave stuff to the interpretation of the audience, then the sort of more detailed you get, the better. And wow, you can really get vivid with descriptions. Like, as I said, for instance, you've got the bare skull, the dislodged jaws, the white eyes, and in fact, let me just post this, just so everyone can see just how great the artist is. First of all. Here we go. There we go. So, just going to copy that. Now everyone can see just how... Go to profile. Thank you. Gotta love these Twitter updates. So, everyone can see just how wonderfully, wonderfully violent this particular chap looks. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Shall go to... Right, stand by. Yep, I have put it in the... Oh, scroll up. Pin chat. Okay, there we go. Oh, don't need that. There we go. Link to Twitter, so everyone can enjoy that particular image. And done. So, this sort of brings me nicely into... I think everyone's version of horror, I think, is subjective, and Lee was saying, and I think we all want different things. I think some of us want, your jump scares and whatnot, but I think the most effective ones will always be the stuff that sticks with you. And I think you won't get horror that will stick with you more unless it really, really gets inside you. So obviously not out to really disturb people so they can't sleep at night, but if that's a bonus, then who am I to say? But yeah, I was glad I actually saved this for Halloween because it was one of the ideas I was more proud of, actually, to do the corrupted souls. And I've sort of posed a question to everyone here. When it comes to either your work in progress, the works you want, or the works you want to see, what is the kind of horror? If you want something to be either horrific or if you want to be either scared or challenged in that way, what's your ideal form of horror? And Shane actually started out writing horror, and it's such a broad spectrum as well. I know I'm offended that nightmares provided the perfect subject matter for it. Yeah, because I'm sort of the belief that when it comes to dreams in any kind, then they are connected at some point to your something going on within your mind, so that when it has to conjure these images, whether it would come seemingly out of nowhere or not, those ideas either have to be in there or kind of form from other things, which in a way is kind of like the writing process, really. It's interesting that our inspiration, it's fair to say that our inspiration can come either from the positives or the negatives. Psychological horror. Honestly, yeah. I'm not one... I'm squeamish as heck. You wouldn't know from listening to that, but I'm not a massive fan of, the body horror. I've seen enough of... body horror stuff to last me a lifetime. I don't need to see more. So psychological horror is great. I think one of the few horrors that actually went out of my way to see, which was The Shining, The Exorcist. Haven't seen The Omen yet, but those kind of ones are brilliant because they're kind of subtle. And as you say, jump scares don't do anything. So the great thing about the printed medium is you can't be cheap and can't wuss out with jump scares. That's a very good point, actually, Addy. I love to try and viscerally describe and see all the eternal struggles we have, like anxiety or fear, toxic coping mechanisms. Yes. And so in for the creepy horror as well, but that builds and builds. Oh, yes. And atmosphere. Yes, of course. It's all about setting a good atmosphere as well, because I often find that the best horror that you can get builds and builds. Like, you start out, perfectly normal, and then the stakes get higher as the atmosphere gets worse, and you kind of imagine that if this is in the visual medium, whether it be TV or film, that's when the low-level music starts, and it just builds. And of course, with writing, you kind of have to deliver that builds and builds by yourself. I know when it came to writing this particular scene in the book, the good thing was that I'd spent quite a bit of time before setting up the world of the Styx, which is, the limbo world where these ghosts are encountered. And already you've got a sense of death about the place. It's all rotting around them. Everything's kind of stagnating. You see a boat full of souls going to the other side, so you already know how things are supposed to be. And then people start seeing things out of the corner of their eyes. Then they get the Evangelion, Ever Unit 1 style horrific roar. And then they see this lumbering monstrosity. And then you've gone from the build-up, which has lasted a couple of pages, to the payoff. And you just kind of hope that your payoff, boom, straight in there. I hate jump scares. I have a ridiculous overactive Same. I am so jumpy, and I cannot for the life of me deal with jump scares. As I said, it's one of the great things with the with the printed medium, is that as you just, because you can't honestly write, and then he turns around and sees something. That's not scary. So if you were going to do that kind of fake out, then you'd have to do it in a much more effective way. I find the build up difficult. I can't get the pacing just right, and again, that is the difficult thing. When do you reach the point where it kind of stops becoming build up and starts becoming filler, basically? Not saying there is filler, but there's an interesting. It's sort of like when you're building up, it's almost like you need to almost meet cues. Like if it was a stage cue, for example, you don't overstate your mark. You kind of have to give them enough so that when they read it, if they are visualizing it, then they can see that atmosphere and sort of experience it vicariously through either the characters, or that you've set this place up enough and given it enough description that's like, it's, for example, this environment around us is so still, so quiet, but you can feel a million eyes are staring at you. Pardon me, but is it just your paranoia? I'm really desensitized when it comes to horror. I grew up loving it, and most of it's seen as a teen. This thing special to really scare me anymore. I mean, that is a big challenge for a writer, how to scare the desensitized. But I find that humour and horror are really interesting in how subjective they can be. But there are things that I think the majority of people will be scared by or will be terrified by. Now, whether they be, sense of loss of humanity, sense of loss of sanity, all these different things, it can really be subjective. So you'll often find, I think, that a lot of stuff that markets itself as horror will focus on the kind of things that people will generally experience or have that kind of knowledge of experience. Like, was it Get Out? Was it Get Out? I think it was Get Out. Starring Daniel Kaluuya, which was a horror movie from a couple of years ago that had racial prejudice being the sort of horror of it. I believe that's right. I haven't seen it. Please correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm thinking of something else. But again, that was, from the reviews I've seen, that was great because you've taken the horror and then done it a different way. Now, I understand that, especially in the things we write, trying to do something new in the horror genre would be quite difficult because it's quite restrictive, because there aren't that many things that we find as horrific as we do funny in the broad sense, I think. Not the kind of horror that generally gets me anymore is a kind of existential horror. That kind of horror really freaks me out. I could see that, yeah. What was one above it? More than likely need to focus on Kasumi, as she is a new being that's seeing everything fresh, and it's sort of random mutant attacks, but Kasumi can come out of a sheltered upbringing. Again, and that's where I think we had this conversation before about the author's, almost like the author's surrogate / the author insert character. Now, not saying Mary Sue or author insert, audience insert rather, because if you're creating a new world, first of all, the opportunities to do horror are so much more now because you've created a fantasy world. There's all these new things that can scare the living daylights out of you or try to kill you. But if you are seeing it through the eyes of someone who's new to the world, then their horror is your horror, because a lot of horror comes from the sense of the unknown. So when you're making this unknown, whatever it is, then it's great to have a character who is experiencing this for the first time as well, because it's saying, in your regard, here's a big mutant attack. You've got two opinions. One is, oh no, here we go again. The other one is, oh my god, what the hell is that? And that is obviously the one that is the opinion that you focus on, because the character is seeing it at the same time as the audience is seeing it. That's the in. I think a lot of horror focuses on a loss of control. Granted, it uses contained tools to it, but so much horror is people trying to regain some semblance of normalcy or control. Yeah, and I think, like, when you have, say, transformation horror, body horror, and sort of turning into the unknown and natural types, you can really get a sense of really like visceral horror from that, just from, oh my god, this person's turning into a hideous monster. What can they do about it? Nothing. Which is why when it sort of came to doing book one, I know the sort of villain character is proven to be a bit hit or miss, but one thing that I loved doing with him was his slow transformation into a monster, because he's not a sympathetic character, but the body horror angle of him slowly turning from old man into one of those beasties that I just linked to, the kind of horror of that isn't, oh my god, I feel so bad for him. No, we almost want this to happen, but we just don't want to deal with what happens after the fact. And his loss of control means that as a villain, you know, he gets a lot less. As over time, he has a lot less to lose until the end, where it's just all or nothing, really, which is pretty disturbing for a villain. And again, it proves that, well, you can. I think this is something that you don't often see a lot of, but I think Sonny might be certainly exploring this, is the idea of you can still have body horror and you can still have horror in general happen, and horrific things happen to characters, but they don't always need to either be the protagonists or the ones that you are, you know, necessarily rooting for. I think that what we don't see a lot of is a lot of horrific things happening to the antagonists, them losing control, and then them becoming far worse villains as a result of it, because over time, say if you've got a really... I mean, the first example to mind comes from, if any Whovians are out there, the Doctor Who story Survival. You've got the Master, who is a, you know, normally moustache-twirling, very elegant villain. And then he starts getting this virus that turns him into an animal. All of a sudden, your cunning manipulator is now trying to crack your main character's skull open with a rock. So you tend to lose a lot of... I mean, just with transformation anyway, you tend to lose a lot of that character, like core characteristics in there, and that's what makes for good drama as much as it makes good comedy. Bloody hell. No, good horror. Pause for drink. And as I said, horror beings... Cheetah Virus. Yes, I knew we had some Whovians in. But yeah, the horror being subjective is definitely an interesting point, but I feel that if you go into your work sort of wondering how... I mean, first of all, if you're sort of wondering going into this thinking, you know, how can we be disturbing, then it's a sort of interesting take, because I think when it comes to having characters that go through these things, you sort of think, right, well, if this is a character's journey, are we going towards this character's demise, or are we going through the next stage? Because a lot of times, if you want like effective character growth, I think people are generally consider that characters going through trauma is a you know, discerning character trait. You know, they... most of the time it's like, oh, I've lost my parents, or this has happened to me, or that's happened, but I don't think we see it as many times as, I didn't start out being this particular way and now look at me. And again, I'm looking to Sonny's work particularly in this, because that involves transformations, and some pretty nasty transformations as well. Very well done. But yeah, horror through sort of transformations and lack of control is just, if it's done particularly effectively, can just be so much fun to read and write, but also wonderfully disturbing. Just trying to think if there are any other good examples. And especially if they can recover from it as well, because you'll often end up with a character there who's been through a lot, and then they'll go into their next stage of character development very much changed. So if you want very effective character growth, then turning them into something, even temporarily, or having them go through some real like nasty stuff, is just brilliant. If done right. Again, we were told, I can't remember if it was in English or drama, but I was told that there's no, whatever class it was, there's no wrong way of doing it. And I think that's kind of true from, it all depends on how it's presented. I don't think I can honestly think that while we sort of say horror is subjective, I think if written in a certain way, anything can be made, any kind of horror can be made to be effective to the right reader or the right person if it's done in such a way, like slasher horror, transformate body horror, psychological, existential. As so much so that it's sort of one of these things where you loathe to even call it a genre in itself because of all the subgenres. Because horror, as we know, can just be so much. But when it comes to actually shaping your narrative, I think it will be informed a lot on how you intend to go about it. Because different genres will obviously allow different stories will allow itself different genres naturally. Like fantasy, you expect, you've got these fantasy creatures you expect werewolf, vampire, etc., etc. Sort of more thriller types, you can sort of go into psychological, and then sort of more deeper drama type things. Then you can go into the big existential ones. So it's a very wide genre, and it's definitely one that I think people have a lot of fun exploring. And what's great as well is that for the most part you can even just slip it into any other genre and still have it be effective. You can't really do that with others. Like, you can't really have a urban political drama and then start adding fantasy elements in it unless it's really, an out there book. But if you have, if you have like your urban dramas, then you can add in like psychological horror and all that stuff. So it's wonderfully versatile. And I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to who have horror as something in their book is never their primary narrative. I know with Trent, I call it a supernatural fantasy romance, but when it comes to elements in there, there is also the horror elements. So much so that one of the reviews I said urban fantasy with hints of gothic horror, which again I will happily take. Is this the case of when you go to write these things, do you start by saying, I'm going to write this thing in this genre, or just go and write the story you want and then see what best fits it? Sometimes the bad guys think that they accept something horrible in order to achieve their goal, when they really don't truly need it, because they think that's revenge against those who don't. Yeah, as we know, revenge does bring out the worst in a lot of people and tends to put people over the edge, villains included. So it's as I said, a very subjective thing, but I think there's a lot of examples out there of all the different ones that people can follow. I know when people cite H.P. Lovecraft as a big one, and then you've got, some of the more, I suppose you could say, sort of supernatural and the sort of darker gothic themes of stuff like Edgar Allan Poe, all the obvious ones. They're types of horror you can generally see in other things. I can't tell you how many times we've seen the Cask of Amontillado being put into the into the cultural mind of everyone, or the Raven and stuff like that. But when it comes to sort of finding your niche of horror, really, it does always depend on what you write. I think so many of the writers here have delved in it. Shane, Addy and Sonny all sort of having their parts in it, which is great because, as I said, it is so versatile that it can slot into other genres relatively easily. Because then you can also say, right, well, the horror aspect comes into character growth, or it comes into progressing this or that along. I know there's a few traps that I obviously didn't want to fall into. Like, I think it can be quite easy to have a lot of genre tropes when it comes to horror, but the good thing is that because of the sheer size of it, the chances of you finding one is quite thin. Cask of Amontillado is my favourite. Yeah, if anyone doesn't know that, then that is the tale of all I need to say is guy gets bricked up in a wall who's still alive. We've all seen that happen. Bloody Thomas the Tank Engine does it. Scars the minds of kids from an early age. So it does get into all forms of literature, doesn't it? Urban fantasy horror. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask, if you're allowed to say, whether it's spoiler or not, what form of horror does that take? Does that take does that take body horror? Does that take psychological? Because it will depend on how it's instigated and whether it's through the characters as their like growth, motivation, whatever. So it's a wonderfully versatile genre. To be honest, until I actually started writing this, I never really considered it because before I started writing this, I just assumed incorrectly that when you are adding horror elements to it, it would take more of a focus. Addy, seriously, you laugh, but if you grew up with this stuff, you would not like. If you start looking up Cask of Amontillado and think, oh my god, that happened to a train with a face on it, then you know true horror. It's true horror. Again, that is another case of just kind of horror and horrific elements working its way into anything. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or whatever, but I kind of think that there are two types of literature: the type that you can sort of pick up and enjoy, but like for instance, I would call Trem a pick up and enjoy it book, but I would also say that if you have lost a relative or whatever, and this book deals with the themes, and if that helps you at all, then I think that's more than I could ever ask. But then I think there are books that you can read, and there will be stuff in there that you can like take from, and then it like challenges you in a way. And previously, I just sort of was under the sort of incorrect assumption that horror in only really sort of I suppose because we've had so many movies in the past that have just been horror movies where people just get taken by a slasher and it's all very violent for the sake of it. But then you start getting the psychological stuff, and then you start getting that in printed form. Oof, very different. I mean, Stephen King sort of treaded the line between sort of out and out, sort of nasty horror, and then the real sort of psychological stuff, which sort of seems to dwell under the surface a lot. And I think it also depends as well. Do you want to scare your audience or like legitimately challenge them? Like, I know we'd all call Clockwork Orange, as much as I hate it, we'd all call Clockwork Orange a horror, but there isn't like a slasher killer. It's horror in the sense of it's challenging you to sort of come to terms with a lot of horrific ideas and confront a lot of horrific things in society. So there's that difference. And I think when it comes to everyone's sort of impression of it, I definitely think that if anyone's sort of coming in here writing a lot of deeper horror stuff, then that could go a long ways to be a lot more memorable, especially since nowadays the majority of your horror genre has sort of been taken over by the brainless slasher stuff, and that is just, couldn't be dealing with it. Let's see. Shane, it's a huge part of the character's growth. It's basically through psychological horror, lucid dreams and sleep paralysis, Shadow Man. Ooh, that sounds very, very intimidating. Horror and my stuff fits in so well. Ali, I will at you the episodes just for your own amusement at some point. I mean, maybe before Halloween we could all do with them being... Sonny, I did not want pacts to be a simple thing like they were, in a way, from the source which I drew inspiration from. The body horror that I added seemed a proper addition to that. Two souls become one. Ooh, yeah. Horrible transformation. Well, yeah, again, because that will play into your lack of self-control, especially if you've taken two separate entities, mashed them together, and then having to deal with the ramifications of that, especially if you're dealing with the potential of one person wanting to take control over the other. Ooh, possession much? Ooh. My big thing is to challenge people, mostly to raise awareness of horrible forms of depression and anxiety. I mean, that is perfect. Like, in terms of using... Back when I did my media course in college, I did a paper on how sci-fi movies reflect modern issues, because I think a lot of times most media will reflect some form of modern thing, whether it will be a modern issue or a modern opinion of things, etc., etc. So using horror as a way to expand people's awareness and sort of understanding of mental health is just a terrific way of going about it, and of course extremely noble. But that's just great, because people will often I think struggle to go through experiences or to struggle to understand experiences they haven't gone through, and to use horror as an allegory. Now that is skillful, and you have completely sold me. And it's not that warm actually. I'm still wearing a t-shirt. Because again, psychological horror, what form does that take? That's like the big question. It's one of the reasons why, as I keep saying, it's such a versatile genre, because you can take so many different things that are just so nasty and evil and awful, and then put it through a different lens. Horrible things can happen, but you can make the best of it. Yes, it's through the pact and the horror that she finds friends, family, and love in the end. Because sometimes, especially in horror things, if your characters can actually survive to the end of it, then you've got a nice rounded little thing at the end. We've all just survived whatever that monstrosity of an experience was. So, and I think generally, I don't know if there's a sort of expectation that horror should always end badly, but when it comes to using it as a bonding thing, I think people will definitely come out the other end with at least a sense of fulfillment and sort of life affirmation. Because even at the end of there was the lyric at the end of Les Miserables, even the darkest night will end and the sun will rise, which, especially if you're using that to sort of round off a particularly horrific experience, I think that would resonate quite well with audiences. Just like with Shane, the idea of using horror as a mental health allegory. It's all, if you want to challenge the people by giving them one, heck of an arduous journey in order to get to that happy place. I know one of my favourite animated movies, as much as you maybe won't count it as horror, I know as a kid it scared the living daylights out of me, which was Secret of Nim. And that was, you couldn't get more pure of a justification for Mrs. Brisby's journey, which is saving her child. Then, you've got these images straight out of, these horrific images. You've got murder, you've got sort of potential supernatural stuff, you've got these grungy looking fight sequences. It's brilliant. But by the end of it, it might have been a horrific journey to get there, but at least you're feeling better because they got to the end goal. Hey, more Secret of Nim fans. As humans, we all fear something, so it's super effective. Yeah. I mean, I think we all have our rational fears and our irrational fears, whatever they can be. And I think we'll always find something to scare us. And I think we generally seek out, we sometimes seek out the horrific things as well in media and stuff. Obviously not stuff to be at the point where it would trigger us. And I use that in the proper sense as well, not the troll sense. But I'm again bringing it back to Doctor Who. I'm reminded of a great interview with one of the showrunners from the 70s. Yeah, and it was in response to the violence of the show. The response, he said, the question was, what would you say to people who thinks it's too violent? And the showrunner responded with, I think people use the word violent when they often mean frightening. It has been very frightening over the years, and that's why people and that's why children tune in, because they want to see monstrous things happen. And I think there's elements of truth to that, for sure, because I think there's I suppose, a lot of reasons why because I'm sort of guessing now because I've never done it myself. I think a lot of people would want to go and see horror to sort of almost get that shot of, vicarious adrenaline and get that sense of rush of anxiousness and, energy from the particular horrific movies. That's probably why all the slasher movies do quite well for themselves, because it's, high octane and whatnot. But that isn't always true for horror things. I think, again, there will always be the people that will want a quick scare, and then there'll be the challenging ones who will want to be able to go into stuff. And it's almost like with a slasher movie, you're just defeating one bad guy, but then with the psychological stuff, you're overcoming fears that you might not always be able to see. And I think anyone who's struggled with mental health, or anyone who's struggled with, stuff in the past, these thoughts of going through this psychological or existential horror and coming out the other side okay. I know that certainly in my dark moments, which is really hard to talk about with this get up on, the sort of thought of getting through all this horror in order to come out the other end, just being able to guarantee that would just be, best thing in the world. So I think there is, as I said, definitely a lot of life affirmation that can come out of going out the other side. I mean, in Sunny's case with Project Edgewater, it definitely comes... People come out of the horror in that and come out of the body transformations and the mutations and all that stuff. People will come out of that generally in a slightly better place, I think it's fair to say, than when they started. I can't say too much because I've read the few drafts and I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, I think having horror and then coming out the other side of it will just do wonders for both characters and book readers alike. Lingering horror. Especially when... And we always talk about character growth, all the things you can do to make your character... It's so bad to say interesting, because your character doesn't need to be a psychological mess in order to be interesting. That's... But when it comes to sort of shaping your characters to be... My characters survive even though they change. Yeah. Your characters don't always need angst. I think that is a trope that a lot of people feel like they need to follow. Because when I... Let me get my water. When I first considered stuff that I was attempting to write, my first attempt at something, which was I think 2014, which was 2-3 years before I had the sort of rough idea of Trem. The original idea was just like a slice of life in a magical academy with no actual villains to fight. But then, and because I actually for a long time wanted to be that guy who doesn't put antagonists in his books, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I think over time when it came to actually coming up with Trem, I thought, well, let's put a big bad in there. But I think angst isn't always required, but I think if you were to do it and to do it justice, then to have a sort of very clear sort of goal of we're gonna make this character go through some horrific stuff, and how they deal with that will see them through to the other side. Because I think the reason why people people like a lot of protagonists from horror is because they can survive the night, overcome the demons, blah blah blah, while still obviously retaining enough inside of them to come out the other end okay. Or if it was in the case of something like The Thing, survive long enough so that you're the last one to die. Barrel of laughs. So yeah, I think it's one of the wonderful things about the genre that you can use it as a way to really develop your characters and say, like, how they deal with this. You are throwing stuff at them and then they overcome it or they don't, and how they deal with that develops the characters. See, every time I come on here, I start praising Sunny, and then we have the conversation going. Accept the praise. And because I think a lot of the horror inspirations have been there and plays out so brilliantly. And there is enough. Honestly, it sounds like I was bad-mouthing it. As a character who has written like over a dozen new characters for book 3, like 3 or 4 of them have got angsty backstories, because I think you can have the most like happy-go-lucky person in the world, and then you can break them throughout the course of the book, or you can present someone who's already been through the meat grinder, and they find their way to exist within the world, then I think they're both equally valid. I think, yeah, angst is fun. I think people do need to be careful when they are writing angst, though, that you should always keep in mind that whenever we're writing this stuff, we kind of do want, unless we're like really hipster 15-year-old, like Wattpadders, I think we do want people to read this stuff and like it. So when it comes to all our angsty characters, the last thing we want is to just have this like miserable, unmoving lump of a person who's just arms crossed, not moving, not caring throughout the entire thing, just because of all the teenage angst riddled inside of them. Again, because I'm cosplaying my hero, my immediate response was Katsuki Bakugo, and even he had like a guy who's constantly like hormonal rage, angst, then to sort of come around and actually make a U-turn and change and grow as a character, then that is always good. I think if you just have a character that's pure angst, then you might need to go to the drawing board, because you might have a one-dimensional character there. Yeah, there has to be a reason for it, and how they deal with it should help their growth as a character. I know that all the characters I have that have angsty backstories, all but one of them, I believe, sort of their angsty backstories are that. They are backstories. They don't allow it to, impact them in the now. And the one that does, I can't say that particular character's angst goes away at the end of it, because it's due to stuff they can't control. But hopefully by the end of it, then they're left in a slightly better position than they were when they started. So yeah, we could go on a whole thing about, God, this looks awful. We could go on a whole thing about angst and characters and all that stuff, because again, there's no wrong answer, but you do have to keep in mind that you want your characters to be investable. You may affect yourself with your doom. Yeah, I know I've seen quite a few things that are just dreary. It kind of sucks the life out of you. I haven't read anything like that, because I get about by the end of the third chapter and probably give up for my own safety. But you just sort of see things that just like, they are a vacuous void of enjoyment, just absolutely nothing. And some people like that. I couldn't really say I'm one of them. I mean, that reminds me of, I personally wasn't a fan, but I know it had a big one, sort of going back to horror, American Horror. The only one that I've seen, like, actually started following was Freak Show, and man, I couldn't get through that. Not because it was bad, but because, wow, they can't catch a break. And there was something that I definitely saw, it's used a lot in British comedies, and I can't stand the trope. It was the everyman who can't get it right. And I just, like, get past the, like, second season, and I thought, oh my god, why are we even bothering? I know we've gone a long way off of horror, but, like, to me, if you want something to kill an enjoyment quickly, then it's the person who can't catch a break and is almost punished for not catching a break. Because that in itself can be its own horror. Just the existential going around of nothing, just nothing good, no pleasure, just pain. We get enough of that. Thank you. There's something to be said about fear and said for fear and dread in broad daylight. Ooh, yeah. Especially a lot of, you could get away with some real, like, dark horror without following the tropes of needs to be at night, needs to be the masked serial killer. You can really screw people up with that. Especially if you start making the mundane things scary. Going back to Doctor Who again, not because I'm obsessed or anything, but we were talking to someone who's just started it, and they now can't look at statues anymore because of Blink. So in a way, good job, Stephen Moffat. You've just now made someone's life a living hell for the next few years. Because I think it is American horror has gone so bad. American is in the country. American Horror Story is still fantastic. Oh, good to know it's still fantastic. I've not caught up with any of them recently, but yeah, I think there's a lot of ways of doing horror wrong. And while I don't pretend to be an expert critically, I've seen a lot of attempts people have made of doing horror nowadays can be quite bad. But when people actually try and push the envelope and do something good, whether it be stuff like Get Out, you could tell I've not really read a lot of horror literature recently. And well, I suppose it extends to the Stephen King stuff because it does apply. The more twists you do on it, the better, I guess, because there's only so much you can do with, your axe murderer, your psychological horror, your beastie that lives within your mind. There's only so much you can do with that. But as we said with previous streams, at this stage there's no original ideas. There's only a combination of different things, and how you take these different things, merge them all together from new thing. That combination and that new take on things is how I think you don't stifle with creativity. Or if you do something that's been done before, then you change it up, you change a subgenre, you change the setting, enough stuff so that you are left with not a carbon copy of, Friday the 13th, The Shining, The Omen, etc., etc., or any of the Stephen King stuff. Okay, if we're going to talk about Weeping Angels, then I have to say my mother freaking traumatised me with something similar. As a kid, she used to tell me that when I closed my eyes, things, furniture and animal objects moved and literally still unnerves me. You got cute with Toy Story. She made Toy Story horrific for you. Just the thought of, right, I'm going to look away, everything's now moving and it's trying to kill me. Well, that awful Small Soldiers movie, less said the better. Shane, honestly, I'd love to see an axe murderer be a main character who ends up coming across a challenge or becoming an anti-hero. Honestly, yeah. I mean, I had a while ago when I was toying with ideas, I sort of explored the idea of, well, what would happen if you just sort of went through this history of a family who are killers and serial killers, but, because their prey isn't exactly nice people, then you will end up rooting for your anti-heroes because they are bad people targeting even worse people, so you kind of don't feel great for rooting for them. And then that's almost... And it reminds me of a... video that was going around on Twitter, which was Michael Myers in his mask going around like waiting to kill someone, and then a Karen comes up and says, "Oh, you're not supposed to be wearing your mask. Oh, think of the CO2. Oh, I'm not wearing a mask, but you can't ask me." And then he just stabs her to death. And I thought I would love... no other Michael Myers movie would get me into the theatre, but I would love to go down and actually pay money to see Michael Myers killing Karens in, like, our pandemic situation. With people not wearing a mask. And it's like, if people can write that, if someone can actually write that, then I will buy that in an instant. This is our protagonist. He's not our hero, he's our protagonist, and he is a murderer. He is still like Anton from No Country for Old Men. That's one thing that's running to mind. He's killing people, but he's not Night of the Living Karens. Someone please write that down. Someone who is evil. No, not evil. Someone who is a bad guy, but he's not evil because he is targeting the bad ones, the worst people. And especially if you consider actually going into the psyche of someone like this in a book and actually exploring it, then you could get to some real deep dives into, what makes people commit murder, but then what makes these people who are killing the right people, the non-innocents, what makes them different from others, and, why are they not considered any better or any worse? This is a horror movie. Do you know what it's called? Because I would watch that. And then does it have a novelisation? Because I would read that. Well, we had... that's been a very quick hour, hasn't it? I'll probably just sort of get a few more rounded points and then actually call it for this one, because I generally do an hour, because it's mostly me talking, my throat's already dry. You know, I should say this whole thing started, this whole live stream started because I was supposed to do my book 2 launch at the Sci-Fi Scarborough event. And it was going to be, you know, we booked a table, we were going to go down there, you know, sell my wares. But then the pandemic happened and we weren't obviously allowed to go down because it just got into the realm of having to be cancelled. If it was a couple of weeks earlier, then we might have gone. But what I decided to do instead was do one of these live streams. And then I thought, oh, well, that's good. It will give me something to do in lockdown. And then I did it for a month. Did it next month and then kept doing it. We obviously had the break, so this has been the somewhat spooky Halloween theme. You know, keep all the horrific symbolism going, and seeing what we can come up with to discuss. And I'll tell you, as someone who isn't a self-confessed horror fan, definitely I'm glad we've had this conversation, because now I want to go away and write something pretty horrific like what we've discussed. I will say there's been one idea that's sort of been floating in my mind, obviously keeping the Trem idea stuff going, but I've said that if I run out of ideas, there's 2 book ideas I want to do. One is Ward 27, which I've discussed before, but I won't discuss too much. And the other one I've always wanted to do was, could you imagine a demonic possession story, and I'm sure these exist, but a demonic possession story that's done for the benefit of the possessed? By which I mean you'll have this young woman in like very conservative background, parents very strict, you know, not allowed to go out anywhere, not allowed to do anything, you know, yearns for a better life, gets, you know, possessed by a demon, goes out on the debaucheries and, you know, goes literally to hell and back with this level of sin, if you will. And this goes completely like against the parents. And while this is demonic possession, and they do end up doing some pretty gnarly things, even if it is a horror in that regard, because at first it doesn't have... If I'm giving you ideas, Shane, I want half the copyright. But it's like, yes, this is quite horrific because it's a demon, and you know, demonic possessions usually don't lead to anything good. And even if it doesn't, the ride along the way will turn this, like, country girl who's only known, you know, these 4 walls in the Bible, and now she's, you know, living a life of sin and all manner of things. Then it's like, almost, I suppose, the antithesis of horror, really, because you've taken something that should be very horrific and then made something good about it. But again, as I said, no original ideas anymore. Why not? You messaged me. Phone's here in the middle of the thing. Cool. Right. I think, on that rather lovely note, now that we've all got some really peculiar images in our heads, I reckon that's probably a good time to start rounding off, actually. It's been a very fun hour and 10. I know I always go into this absolutely bricking myself with the thought of, actually, is anyone going to show up? And if so, is there actually going to be anything discussed? And I'm not just rambling for an hour like I usually do. I'm going to still ramble, but hopefully people have found this somewhat enjoyable, as always. Now, next one. I reckon that we'll still probably be in the new second lockdown when I do the second one. So let me check the dates, because it will be a Saturday at around the same time. I'll obviously dish it out to people to see if anyone's actually available in these days, but I might aim for either Saturday the 21st or the 28th of November. Which is a little bit annoying because Doctor Who Day is on the 23rd and that's a Monday. Damn. But yeah, I will finalise the dates. We won't be doing anything, obviously, because we're not allowed to. But we do it to keep everyone safe and happy. We don't want biological horrors going onto the list as well. I think once we get comfy, it's a great way to chat. I know that's the case for me. I mean, I hope it is, because all that I've kind of wanted was these to be, let's meander into a topic and then discuss it. Because I think we've done antagonists, we've done plotting, we've done genre, we've done main characters and how you sort of use them to go through settings. So we've had some very interesting discussions, and sort of made sure that they're all kept on archive, even if my microphone and video quality hasn't always been the best. And one day I'll invest in a better setup, but today's not the day. But yeah, I will say thank you everyone for coming out. This has actually been great fun. And I know it's not a good stream until my throat is absolutely killing me for the amount of talking I've done, and I've drunk about 1 litre of water to keep myself hydrated. I bet this is why local cons are really glad they don't book me as a speaker. But yeah, thank you everyone. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Halloween. It's going to be a strange one for everyone, but I think we'll all soldier through it as best we can. And I will see everyone when I will let everyone know when the next one is, whether it will be the 21st or 28th. I will reach out to everyone, make sure anyone interested will be able to do the dates, etc. And maybe someday we should talk about Edgewater. Oh, yes we shall. I did my best to be there next time too. Yeah, thank you. It's honestly been great having everyone here. And full moon and Mars is visible, I think, for the first time in however many years? In fuller details. Mm-hmm. Good night, Shane. Fuller details. And no, thank you for appearing, Caroline. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, I'll round off and see everyone next time.